Our next speaker up to the ShipperCon stage is Ciaran Carragher, who has a background in networking, however, over the years was drawn to identity more and more. Currently with AWS as a specialist solutions architect in the area of security, Ciaran likes to keep his life spicy. As an active member of the Irish Defence Forces as an Army reservist, where he served for the last 15 years. I honestly think that's usually how the Avengers edition is going to be. So he wears many hats: a specialist, Army reservist, hiker, gamer, and possible future Avenger. Please welcome Ciaran Carragher to the ShipperCon stage.
Hi, folks. That's the first slide. So what I want to talk about today is exactly that, granting developer autonomy while establishing secure foundations. So the point of what I'm trying to do is remove that pain barrier between developers and security teams. I don't want, and I understand that security is sometimes seen as a roadblock. I want to try and make that as easy as easy as possible to implement within industries for all walks of life. Kind of pointless now me having a hello, I am slide after that introduction, but I guess one bit then I want to just say there is everything I do, I try to just simplify security as much as possible, whether it comes to documentation or implementation or learning. So a couple of things I want to just touch on in this presentation. I want to look at the problem quickly from two sides, from the security side, from the developer side. Some of the solutions that are there, I am going to be focused on AWS, I'm a bit biased, but you can abstract from this and think, okay, well, what can I do in another cloud service provider? What can I do on-premise? These kind of ideas can be reused anywhere you go. I'm going to look at some of the real risks that we can address with relative ease. I'm using an unnamed, unknown game publisher for this. This is someone that I've worked with, and I've just omitted their name from this to just kind of give you an example of what they've gone through. So you know that this isn't just theory, this has happened. And then a couple of just key takeaways, summary, and a little call to action if you feel up to it. So, the problem, why does it exist, how can it be perceived? This is a very short summary of the problem from both sides, okay? There can be plenty of more things that would impact it. But from a security team point of view, if I'm trying to implement security measures within my company, I have different reasons for why I have to do what I have to do. One of these things is regulatory frameworks. They need to be adhered to, especially if I'm in highly regulated industries. I have a list of open risks. I may have a thing what's called a risk register. These are all the risks that I perceive to my company and how I want to mitigate them. And in my mind, as coming from a security background, security should be fundamental. It should be owned by everyone, and that's an ethos that I really admire within Amazon as a whole, is that everyone is responsible for security. The developer aspect. As a developer, you may think, okay, well, I need to do my job. I need to get something done. If I have all these hoops to jump through, it's going to be problematic for me. It's going to slow me down. I need access now, not in 10 minutes' time. If I want to build something, if I want to test something, if I want to innovate, maybe having to jump through all these hoops as well is going to just stifle that. And my task evolves, my day-to-day job evolves, my permissions need to evolve too. Give me more permissions initially, please. Let me go do things. People are around putting their hands up saying they touch prod. I have seen people say, why can't I just have admin rights in prod? I kind of hope that question answers itself, but it still happens. But one thing that both sides of the coin should understand and appreciate is that teams need to be able to perform their daily tasks with as little hindrance as possible. You need to be able to grow, you need to be able to innovate, you need to be able to think of new ideas and move forward freely. A system has to be secure, it has to be available, it has to be reliable. And if you store customer data or data that you classify as confidential, sensitive, I must protect this, that has to be adequately protected. And that's something that both sides should understand. So a very rudimental scale. Oh, my animation's broken. Okay, that's what happens when you go from PowerPoint to Google Decks. Anyway, well, that worked. So we're happy. We got squishy there. So, look, okay, I've used colors just to show left and right. Red does not mean bad, okay? I just thought it makes sense that side of the scale. What I'm trying to say is that generally, if you're going towards the right-hand side of the scale, you're getting a bit more intrusive into the permissions and the abilities that a developer has, okay? These are not necessarily bad per se, okay? There are some industries that require more on the right-hand side because they are heavily regulated. Things like Department of Defense, finance sectors, all that kind of thing. But what I want to show here is that if I'm a security team and I need to start doing an overhaul of security, I need to start putting in better measures in place, okay? I don't have to immediately run into, that sounds very definitive, I don't necessarily have to run straight headfirst into the right-hand side of the scale. I can start doing things with tools I already have at my disposal to start giving myself a better security posture and making the security journey for development teams nicer, easier, and essentially getting them on my side and doing this together. So I mentioned that I kind of base this all around my work with an unknown publisher and their studios. So with the context of this having something to do with the video games industry, have a little think to yourselves, what do you think the range of 1 to 30 might have to do with the video games industry? And if the little squishy 8-bit icon helps at all, yes. Roughly, and looking through various video game developer forums and pages, the rough size of a video game dev team can range between 1 to 30. This is for non-AAA. For anyone who doesn't know what AAA is, basically big game developers. So you've got between 1 and 30 developers, okay? You are very restricted in what you can do. These developers are going to be focused, laser focused on building the game, making it as enjoyable as possible, making sure there's no bugs, although it doesn't seem to be happening in the video game industry as of late. I'm not angry. So when it comes to security, it's pretty much an afterthought in most cases. So that's it. So with the video game industry, if I'm starting to think of things like security, things that can take away from me building my game, I'm going to think of less headcount for creative roles, less dev time on the game. I'm going to have to start repurposing people into security positions, and whatever little budget I have to build this game and get it out on time, I'm going to have to start redirecting to security tools. These are things I don't want to do, so sometimes I'm not going to do them. So a bit of context about our unknown publisher. They have several studios under them, okay? So these are several teams working on different games, different projects. They have a centralized security model. The publisher is responsible for security, but as I said earlier, we're all responsible for security, so each of the studios is too. But the mentality has been built over time. There's a centralized security. I don't have to care. A B- approach. Now, I want you all to be very honest with yourselves as you reflect on who has ever heard someone say, we're okay with a suboptimal security solution or approach to security. It has happened. I've heard it more times than I would care to admit, but this is the idea that they went with. B- is still a good grade. It's a passing grade. So thinking back to the scale, with the left-hand side, less impact, less intrusion to developers, the right-hand side, more. So I want to start with some of the no to low impacts. Now, I say no, low, medium, high. The impact will obviously change depending on how you implement it, additions you may make to a solution. They can vary. So it says no or low. It could be medium or high, depending on what you do. So within AWS, you have, and if you're a different CSP or anything else, similarities apply. We have things called IAM roles, okay? These are principles that a user can assume and can basically get permissions to do a task, okay? What happens is, in AWS accounts, people build them, people test them, they make the roles they need to do, they give them the permissions they need to have, and they forget about them. I don't need that anymore, okay? It was a testing thing. Now I've potentially automated it. It's part of a Terraform template or a CloudFormation template, and I'm now going to push that as part of a bigger piece of automation. But I don't have to care about the testing piece I did. That's a dev account. Who cares about a dev account? You can do this the hard way, and you can go through all the API calls that come with the IAM service in AWS, and you can start querying last use, okay? It's an API for the IAM namespace, and you can start going through each of the roles and seeing when was this last used. Maybe I want to say, if anything's older than 90 days, classify it as stale, okay? Now you've got a metric, you can say, okay, what am I going to do with this? If you want to do it a slightly easier way, we have AWS config, okay? You can make a very simple rule. It will scan through either one account or all the accounts in what's called your AWS organization, which is a logical grouping of all your accounts under one hood. And you can get all that feedback into one centralized place. This means that you then have the ability to say at a glance, okay, I know based on criteria that I've set of what is stale, I know what kind of real estate I'm working with, to what things people aren't using and I should probably clean up. Because remember, it always comes back to the conversation of risk. And the more open things I have sitting there not being used, that's a higher risk profile for me. So I'll just leave them there for a second. These are QR codes to different solutions, different blogs. The one we have here on the left is based on the architecture diagram I just showed there. Just going through your accounts, scanning, finding what's there. And then on the right-hand side, we have auto remediation. So what was just mentioned there earlier is that you should really avoid building automation that kind of takes away a lot of the context and clarity. On the right-hand side there, that will actually not delete roles for you straight away based on you saying 90 days, delete it. It will actually prompt you. It will send an email to the account owner and it will say, these roles have been identified as stale, what would you like to do? And for each one you can say keep or delete. So it's keeping that context there as well. However, you can modify it if you so wish to go down that route. Finding gaps in MFA, multi-factor authentication. I guess it's an assumption on my side that MFA is a given with anything you do, but I'm in security. So, yeah. It is, I was talking to a colleague yesterday, and I believe that 20% of the security incidents that we deal with customers come from root credentials being used. It is quite surprising how many people will still use root credentials because it's root and I can do whatever I want with them. Just bear in mind that if root ever gets exposed, it's pretty much endgame because they can go in, they can do what they like. Now, there are caveats with that. If it's within an org, you can do certain lockdowns. But MFA, this is something that you should be trying to get on as fast as possible. You can go through your accounts and you can scan, and you can use config, or you can do it again, calling APIs directly. And you can say, okay, well, for the IAM users, how many of them don't have MFA? List them to me. Mark them as non-compliant. Show me in a report. For root users, how many of them don't have MFA? What accounts do they exist? Who's the owner of the account? And what's their contact information? So now I know what teams I have to start reaching out to. And with you have also then have the option for enforcing that. So when it comes to root users of accounts that are called member accounts within an organization, you can start putting in policies in place to say you're not allowed to access anything without root or without MFA in place. And with IAM users, you can put a simple policy to say every API call absolutely has to have an MFA code associated with it. Really easy ways for you to just quickly pivot and mitigate that risk there. Very simple. These are just the config rules that you can get. Any things like the config rules, though, just literally type in AWS config manage rules. You get a whole library of them, and you can go through and have a look and see what they do. Access keys and their age. Okay, so this is something that you may, if you work in AWS or work with AWS or any other CSP, they'll try and get you away from what are called long-term credentials, okay, to move to what's called temporary credentials. There are security benefits to having temporary credentials, the obvious bit being they're temporary, okay? So it means at least if they're exposed out in the open, there's only so much of a lifespan that they're going to have that risk window is open for. There are use cases, and this is where I pet peeve of mine, I hate the term best practice. To me, there's no such thing because what's good for one is not necessarily good for another. There's recommended guidelines in my head. It's a recommended guideline to use temporary credentials, but there are use cases for long-term credentials. If you have one, fantastic. Make a risk register, document the risk, mitigate it. So finding out what access keys, the long-term credentials we have out in the wild is really good, okay? It lets us know what could potentially be exposed, okay? We can use, for this example here, we have config, but it's also using a service called SSM, Systems Manager, okay? With this, we can then scan through all the accounts in our organization, and we can say, okay, well, now I know all the access keys that are over an age that I define. Again, we can say 90 days. What do I want to do with that? Do I want to disable them? Do I want to notify the owner of the account? Do I want to do some form of mapping between the IAM user, their name, my on-prem directory, and then go that way and contact the individual themselves, maybe do some sort of escalation path to the manager. But the same with this and with other solutions where it does notification, what I'd always say to people is make the life of the developer or the person who has to action it as easy as possible, in the sense of I don't now have to drop everything and go learn something in order to action this, okay? That is supposedly really important. Give them steps. Okay, it's not hard to rotate an access key. However, it could have impact beyond just simply rotating it and updating it on your CLI. So with the left-hand side, we have just the config rule. The right-hand side is the actual Systems Manager automated solution, if you wish to go to that. That particular solution then can hook into the likes of Jira, any ticketing systems. You can further modify it then to run other documents with an SSM. You can do different things. World is your oyster with it. Animate your data through visualization. So this actually lends nicely then to the piece about amplify your data, okay? I see many, many customers across many, many industries, and they all say to me when I ask them, I do a review with them and I say, are you taking logs? Yes, we're capturing logs. That's fantastic. What logs are you capturing? Oh, all the logs. Okay, what are you doing with them? We're storing them. And well, we're storing them. You know, if we have to give them to an auditor or something happens, we have them and we can look at them then. No. Your logs, that data is super powerful, okay? Not only does it mean that you can react better to an incident because you have, more context available to you of what's happening, but you can actually use that data to start seeing patterns before something really bad happens, and you can get ahead of the curve, okay? You start seeing interesting IAM API calls. You can start going, okay, well, no one really makes those calls. Why are they being made? The only accounts that make them are these 3 accounts, and it's not coming from one of them, or one of them's on leave, so why are they there? Okay, the likelihood of a compromise has now risen in my head. I don't like the risk associated with it. Lock it down. But if you don't make use of that data, something will happen, and you could actually get to the position where you don't realize it's happened. One particular incident I've seen is that someone got into an account and spun up a bunch of EC2 instances with GPU attached to them and mined a boatload of crypto. And the only reason they found out about it is because an intern came in to do a project 3 weeks later and went, that looks funny. It took an intern to find it, okay? So the power of data can be like visualizing data, giving your teams the ability to make use of that data is really powerful. And it helps, as a security person, it helps development teams then as well get involved with the whole process, because they can go, right, I know I can pull a report, I can see where my team stacks, I can see where they stack maybe against other teams, I can get a bit competitive and say, no, screw you on that project, we're better, we've got this thing locked down, you've got a 2% gap. A bit of competition never hurt. So that's this particular solution I really like talking to customers about as well, because I don't like the idea of siloing into one CSP, and that's probably weird to hear from someone that's in AWS. This particular solution that we have uses Security Hub and OpenSearch service on AWS. It's a SIEM. It will ingest logs from nearly anywhere, okay? If you are on Azure, you're on GCP, you're on Blue Ocean, you're on-prem, wherever, you can put your logs in this one place and you can start getting that visualization in one area. You don't have to have a SIEM across many different platforms. Alternatively, don't use it. Totally fine with that. But have a means of visualizing your data, okay, whether it's on AWS or not. So low to medium impact. Okay, so this kind of comes back now to the, should I go from long-term to temporary credentials or not? So if your goal is to move entirely over to temporary credentials, that's totally fine, okay? There's that hurdle of the unknown. How do I do it? How's that going to change my interactions with resources on the platform? What's it going to break? There are different things you can do on IAM with access keys. You can start seeing when they were last used, where they were last used. It won't tell you the IP, but it will tell you the service it was last used with. Could give you a better idea going, why is my access key being used in S3 an awful lot, or in, if it left my head, DynamoDB. You can start going, oh, well, I made that thing 2 weeks ago, and that's starting to do it. Maybe my credentials are embedded somewhere, which is really good then for you to realize, oh, I have hard-coded credentials somewhere. This is not good. The ability to use temporary credentials, really straightforward. Again, give people the tools to do this. So the middle and the right are just two lists of blogs that I find are really, really helpful, really, really useful, walking you through the use of instance profiles and federation as a whole, okay, and how you can interact with different services and how it can be beneficial to you. The one on the left, though, is the one I really love, and I'm in identity. I love federation. But the one on the left is what I really love. IAM roles anywhere. You have a use case where you have an application that is running on a different cloud provider, or is running on-prem, or is running on your workstation. I hope it's not, but reality is sometimes it does. I need long-term credentials in those areas because I can't use an instance profile, so I can't get temporary credentials, and I don't want to build this convoluted script that will do a federation action to use those temporary credentials. In comes IAM roles anywhere. You can use PKI, okay? You can set up a trust between a certificate that you generate, private cert, and the IAM service itself on that account that you're working from. You can store the certificate on the machine that's going to be making those calls, and then every time it has to make a call, a call to an AWS API, it will use that certificate against what's called the STS endpoint in AWS. It'll make that call, say, well, I got this certificate, and the AWS will go, oh, you've configured IAM roles anywhere. I trust this certificate, this PKI chain. I'm going to give you temporary credentials based on the role mapping that we've done there. So really helpful, can be used anywhere, as the name says in the tin. Yeah. Make fine-tuning easier and more transparent. So this is the fine-tuning of permissions, okay? I find that when you start telling someone that has had quite a lot of permissions in the past, yeah, I'm taking some permissions away from you, never really ends well, and it always ends with a kickback. The idea with least privilege, and I feel like it gets lost sometimes, is not to heavily restrict people as much as possible, okay? That's not the point of least privilege. The point of least privilege is to give people the least amount of permissions that they need to achieve their job, okay, and to grow within it. That means that you, as a developer with permissions, can be safe in the knowledge that anything I am doing with these permissions, I'm within a safe boundary. I'm meant to be doing, I'm allowed to do it. And there are plenty of examples out there of where people have had too many permissions and accidentally done something that has been unwanted. And I will stand up here and say AWS is a prime example of that. If anyone remembers in 2017, the S3 outage in North Virginia, that was because a typo, someone put in the wrong number, deleted too many nodes, but if they didn't have the permissions to do that, it wouldn't have happened. There was a COE done on it, cause of error. It's actually quite interesting to read up on, not too long. But using something called Access Analyzer in IAM, this you can use it just individually, put policies into it, see where you stand, or you can build a piece of automation around it, and it will constantly scan your policies and give you feedback on those policies. Do I think they're too permissive? You have syntax errors, you have typos. Are you aware that this is giving ability for people outside of your organization to come in and access it? It is really nice, really helpful. And there are many different things you can do with the likes of Access Analyzer. You can actually then, if I go here, And I believe it is the bottom left one here, is a solution where you can actually read all your CloudFormation, your infrastructure as code templates. It will find all the IAM policies that you have in that code, and it will then go through that and do the same thing. Is it being too permissive? Is it giving access outside your org? Anything like that. Again, all these solutions that I have here push data back to someone, to a security team, and say, this is for your review. None of these solutions will just do something for you. They always ask for your input. You can modify them to do things for you, but again, then you start losing context, then you start losing visibility, and then things start happening that you may not want to happen. A medium to light impact. So this is now when we start on more really far on the right-hand side of that scale from earlier, formalizing and recording the request process. The idea here then is that people come in, you have nice, easy access management for everyone, because they all come in and they maybe have 2 or 3 types of permissions they can get, and they can do very, very little, maybe a bit of read, that's it. If they then want to go do anything else on top of that, like their daily task, they would then have to make a formal request. This might be something that you have someone else approve on, or you may say, I only want to give approval if it is this particular type of account, like a prod account. And then you have that tracking as well. So with these here, on the left-hand side, we actually have a blog and a solution hosted on GitHub, which adds on to what's called the IAM Identity Center service, which is our federated service in AWS, and gives you that whole just-in-time and elevated access management process there, and you can hook that up to any of your ticketing systems as well. I will just say about that, because it has been raised actually by a customer to me yesterday, that is not an AWS service or feature, that blog on the left. That is a community GitHub repo that is owned by someone in AWS. So bear that in mind if you start going, I'm going to implement this tomorrow. There's either going to be maintenance on your side required, or you're just going to have to work with the community to make updates there. The one on the right is more generic. It's just walking and talking you through the whole process of just-in-time provisioning, how it might look, the architecture involved, and actually gives you, I believe it's Python code as well, to just build a very simple sample and go through it. Perimeter controls, okay? As I said earlier, things can be low impact, but they can also flip over to high impact. I put this in high impact because it can affect a vast amount of AWS accounts within an organization. We do these through a thing called SCP, okay, Service Control Policy. They sit at the org level. I think they're one of the first things that people should be putting in place when it comes to putting security measures in. And the first thing I think you should be doing is saying no one in a root account can do anything. If it's a member account, the root of the org is an exemption. That MFA is required for all API calls, and that no one outside your organization is allowed to assume any role into any account in this org. That may have impact on developers, but if you're looking at your risk register and saying, at no point did we ever accept these risks, but because they were never enforced, they just grew legs over time, you can then safely say, I don't care the impact it's going to have, I'm enforcing this, and the people that get impacted can then come to us and we can work with them to build better processes. That may be something you want to do. You may be okay to deal with that flack initially. Some people aren't. This is where the whole, monitoring, scanning, seeing what's out there and working with your teams comes into play more than because you're working with them to get to the point where you can put this in place and nothing really adverse happens, or only one person gets disgruntled and you can work with them. So, I couldn't find a gambling emote in all the pictures we were given, and I was really mindful of putting memes in. I'm really sad I don't have memes in this now, so I tried to make one. So playing the odds. This is coming into our publisher now, okay? And they decided initially, I'm going to play the odds, and I'm going to go with a B- approach to security. So what happened? The video game market last year was valued at over $207 billion, okay? Billion with a B, okay? Prime target for attacks, okay? And if anyone has followed anything, you see things like CD Projekt Red had IP stolen, EA had IP stolen, Rockstar had IP and funds stolen. Years ago, Sony also had an issue where card details were leaked, okay, on the PlayStation Network. It is a target. So, data exposure, okay? These are things that happened to our unnamed publisher, okay? they had data exposure. They had an S3 bucket open to the world, and it had player information in it. Didn't have card information, but it had stuff that could be used to figure out who they were. You're probably all sick of seeing this in one shape or another, but it's always good to mention. This is what's called the shared responsibility model, and it's basically the cutoff point. What a CSP is responsible for and takes ownership for, and what you as the customer must take ownership for. It changes depending on the service you go with. The more managed services you pick, the more the CSP will own, naturally enough, but it's always good to bear in mind. And I see the clock screaming at me now. I will wrap up. Compromised credentials happened. Big publisher, big studios, compromised credentials. They were left out in the open. They were hard-coded. So why I'm saying all this is not to slam anyone. It's to say it can happen to you. It can happen to anyone. Unwanted resources. Remember the story about the crypto happening? It happened to them again. Yeah, twice over the space of a year and a half. So learning from these mistakes is really important. So what have they done, okay, to address that? Well, they contacted us, AWS. They went through their account team, and they got hold of myself in the security specialty. And they said to us, we want to make these security adjustments. However, we don't know what to prioritize. We don't know how we're going to implement it. We don't want to spend a boatload of money on it. They had already lost, I believe it was over $150,000 on the recent crypto attack. So they didn't want to inject anything else into it. What we didn't want to do, we did not want to implement anything with the customer that would drastically alter how developers interact with resources, have a negative impact on their day-to-day work. We didn't want to rapidly deploy permission changes that were more restrictive than before. Again, kind of leads into the first one. And we didn't want to make demands without aids. Okay, we didn't want to say, you have to go and move to this, move to temporary credentials, and not help them, not give them a clear path to how it can be achieved. So our outlook was improve the security standing with as little impact as possible to the customer. So we broke it down into two main areas, and we started looking at identity access management and monitoring and logging. Okay, access management. What we did there essentially led in from monitoring and logging is what do we have out there? What is our real estate out in the open, and what status is it in? So the process they went through with us, this is part of just a project that we're doing the past 2 years on my team in EMEA, and we have it as well in North America too, is where we will walk through a set period of time with customers, and we'll say, okay, this is the journey we're going to take you on to get you from point A to point B, and hopefully point B is a more secure stance. If you are a customer of ours, and this sounds like something interesting that you'd like to do, by all means, catch me later, catch me at the afters. I'm happy to go through it. But that's just essentially the process. It is intake. We work with you to define what are the goals of this task. We work with you to deliver it. We will not build, but we're there to unblock any roadblock that shows up, and then we do a close at the end. The whole way through, we're taking health checks. How are you doing? How are you getting on? Do you need help? Do we need to engage ProServe? Can we get ProServe in either free or reduced cost to you? What can we do to get this over the line and help you out? So what's next for our publisher? So what they've done now to date is they've completed the first step of their journey, and they've taken complete inventory of their real estate. They have built a template of how they want to do that in other accounts for their studios, and they're now working with each of the studios to say, this is what we're going to implement. Have a look through it. Talk to us about it. What do you think is going to be problematic for you, and how can we alter this to make it work more seamlessly for you? We're also doing a game day with them, which is really fun. It's focused on security. We're basically getting a bunch of them in from different teams, security, dev teams, studios, the whole lot, into a room, 3.5 hours just on this, and we are going through security problems, not just on AWS, but in general, to show them that it does not have to be really complex and terrifying to deal with a security incident, but that there are simple steps that you can take to mitigate really, really big security issues. And that's one of the benefits then of being on the cloud, is that there's a lot of power there at your fingertips. So if If you need it too long, didn't read, no problem. What I want you to take away from this mainly is that when it comes to implementing security, it doesn't have to be a nuclear option, okay? There's a nice balance you can find between being really secure and being accessible and friendly to others. Provide the means to simplify. If you're going to simplify something, okay, don't just assume people can do it, and don't put the onus totally on them. Make it as easy as possible it is for someone to achieve the thing that you want them to do. Give them the steps. Don't point them at a massive piece of documentation and say, go read that, and assume that they're going to understand it. Distill the bits that you understand are absolutely important and give it to them. Again, just to touch back on the previous presentation, if there's context there, please don't omit useful context. Engage with AWS early. You're not alone, okay? And I would say engage with your CSP, your partner, your provider, anything early. Ask them questions early on. Don't wait until it's too late, because there's very little that we can do in a short space of time when it's too late, okay? Hit us up as early as possible. We can work with you. We can tell you what we will do, what we won't do. And in my particular case, in my team, we always are quite happy to stand out of the AWS box and say, okay, well, this is something that you can do as a process in general that will help you. So we will help wherever possible. And then my little quest for you all, my little takeaway, a challenge. Again, look, it's with AWS IAM keys, but any provider you're with, or even on-prem. Do you know what kind of keys and what kind of passwords you have out there? Okay? Do you know how they're protected? Do you know what your risk profile is? If you don't, maybe that's something that you can go do now, next week. Don't do it over the weekend. Don't push the prod on a Friday evening. See what you have. See what your risk profile is, and see what you can do then to mitigate that as best as possible. So folks, thank you very much. If you have any questions for me, I'm here all day. And if you want to catch me on LinkedIn, that's the QR code to my page. I like memes, funny ones. So if you want to send them to me randomly, I'm all up for that. Thanks, folks.
Thanks for that, Ciaran. I'm very looking forward to you becoming an Avenger then as well. So guys, our next speaker really honestly needs no introduction. He is a ShipItCon fan favorite, and he's back to grace our stage to share and drop more knowledge as he peels the onion of uncertainty. Rob is a systems thinker, passionate about learning better ways of solving problems for people and